I was reading Norwegian the Family a bit before I was speaking this morning, and I stopped on a place where Roger Silver was mentioned.
Yeah.
And it was interesting how much he connects to someone I'm dealing with at the moment in my own life. And I was mentioning, too, to a couple people recently how it's important in characterization to find a speck of humanity in even the most evil sorts. And that's something that's done very well in this book. Like you said, Paulie has a soft spot. You can see some humanity there, even as he's a clearly very evil character as this big Frank. But you have all these little moments interspersed where a character that is almost entirely a bastard has moments that reveal the better side of his nature, and characters that are, at least good in some sense, in the ethical sense. You show their worst sides. So you get the grayness of the character without a lot of the artificial techniques that often go into that in constructing character in earlier novels. Just speak a little bit about that and finding some of the specks of humanity in the character. And it must be on careful observation of real people to have that.
Well, sure. One of the great things in life that I have is sort of eternal disappointment. We've spoken privately about some of the things I've gone through in the last year, and I knew a lot of people that were as a kid and teenager that were very similar to these people that I write about in these New York books. The most disappointing thing is, though, I don't see any difference in kind between this and most people in business. They're totally amoral. People are just out for themselves. They will lie. They will cheat. They will steal. Your typical middle manager won't take someone out and shoot someone, but they may try to refuse someone health care. They may try to fire someone and try to deny them unemployment benefits. They will try to destroy the people. And when you see this over and over again. And yet, even though being angry at some things, you do. Even these worst people must have some kind of moments of good. The Roger Silver character, for example, I based that on a character called Roger Sterling from Mad Men. I wanted to have an ad executive, and since Mad Men over the last few years, when I was writing this especially, was a big show about the 1960s, I decided, let me have an ad executive, a Jewish guy. And so I based it on that Roger Sterling character. But that Roger Sterling character is sort of goofy and inoffensive. He's a bit of a prig and he's an asshole, but he isn't a murderous. We end up we this is I think it's in the second book that he comes along, but he basically ends up with the woman who later marries Paulie Maravelli, this young girl who's like 45, 50 years younger than Paulie. Uh, he is her lover in the early part of the book, and she wants to get rid of one of her rivals. There are three young girls that we meet: Carla, the girl that ends up being killed, and then another one who's a real life person whose name I forget. The third girl, she actually it just slipped my mind. But so they meet these young girls, and so I think I have. I forget what good qualities I have in him, but you always have to have some kind of a quality. For example, I mentioned Tony Luft. Tony Luft, there's a scene with him and some younger kids in this book where he ends up saving the younger kids from someone. There's the pathetic scene where Tony tries to ask out the girl Carla Schmidt, who later marries Paul, or who's married to Paulie at the time. And it's a kind of sweetness that he has. And then when she rejects him and thinks he's an idiot, he ends up masturbating in a cellar. So that again so we know this guy is a boob and an idiot, but also a psychopathic killer. We get a moment of sweetness, and then we get a moment of the total patheticness of the character. Vito Vincetti, as I said, was a psychopath, basically, in Vincetti Brothers. We see in that book there's a really great scene where he tries a jewelry heist, and we get a little bit of his humanity there. Or is the jewelry heist here in? Is it in Norwegian? No,
The jewelry heist. I don't. There's so many things.
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't recall.
But anyways, but there are a number of scenes. I mean, you know, there's Big Frank, for example. There's Ass Rape Delicious Boy. He befriends Ass Rape Delicious Boy in
Yeah,
prison,
it's a great one.
and we. It's the way Paulie treats people. One of the things we get about Paulie that's interesting is Paulie is abusive on a personal level to a lot of these people, even though he likes Vito Vincetti and whatnot. But we find out the reason Paulie has power. There's a scene where after some heist or something, Paulie is dividing up the spoils fairly. So he's buying loyalty. And we find out from Carlo Gambino, I think it is, that most of the Godfathers, most of they really weren't Godfathers. That's just a made-up Hollywood term. But most of the bosses wouldn't share as much as Paulie. Paulie lives in an apartment. The dentist visits him. They walk in a snowstorm to Paulie's apartment.
He
Paulie
doesn't
lives
even have deodorant.
what?
He doesn't even have deodorant.
Yeah. So Paulie is a working class mob boss, and he's fair with his people, and he looks the other way when they're skimming here or there because he knows he did it, and so Paulie has the loyalty of his men because of that, which is why we find out in early books why years after his death some of these people still want to avenge Paulie's death because Paulie was good to them in this way. But he's a total psychopath. He kills these two young kids. One of them is related to Alan Alda. One of the people he kills is, I think, a cousin to Alan Alda, the actor, whose real name is Alfonso d'Abruzzo. Um, and so you have to have these little moments that are good. There's like I said, there's the funny moment where they're trying to get rid of this toxic waste, and they can't open things, whatnot. There's a scene where it's in the late '40s where I think Paulie is talking about he kills a cop or something. So there has to be humor, and this is why it's a dark comedy. If I wrote this, I mean, compare some of the longer novels, the Russian novels, which are maybe 500, 400, 300 to 500,000 words, considered long novels, but most of those are so arid. There is no humor in Turgenev, Tolstoy, and Dostoevsky. There's no humor in those books. The humor is the grease that keeps this book fresh. If I wrote this as just a tragedy, it wouldn't be what the book is. The humor, characters like Bit, characters like Andy Warhol, Paulie Maravelli, Vito Vincetti, Tony Luft. These are the characters that aren't the main characters, but they're the grease that greases the wheels.